People with home security cameras, what's the creepiest thing you've ever seen happen while you were asleep? When I was a poor college student, my wealthy cousin and his wife went on vacation and offered to let me house sit to give me a break from my three slovenly roommates. They live a few towns over in a very nice house with a huge front lawn and a fancy, tall iron fence and double gates. The fence and gates are about 11 feet high. You have to have a remote to open the gates. That first night I slept so well. I had breakfast like a king and then drove to school. I returned around 5 p.m., made a supper fit for a king, and settled down to write an econ paper. My cousin has a warning system for when someone drives, turns off the road, and comes up to the gate. There's a chiming sound and you can look at screens in a couple of different rooms to see who it is so that you can buzz them in. I was deep into my paper when I heard the chime. I was confused at first and checked my phone before I realized what it was. I looked from the sofa and could see a movement in the security screen. I stood up, got closer, and had a clear view of two women getting out of a white car. One tried to squeeze between the two bars of the gate and then the other woman tried to boost her over the top of the gate. The top one fell and even from the house I could hear swearing. I was about to press the intercom button and ask what their problem was, but I was chuckling at their antics, so I just watched silently. They intently peered at the house from between the bars like a couple of jailbirds. The skinnier one tried to squeeze through the bars again. No dice. Her bum and chest were not allowing that to happen. More swearing. Then as the skinny one got dressed again, the bigger one went back to her trunk and got out a tire iron. As soon as she started messing with the hinges of the gate, I was on 911. The cops took too long and the woman left. I showed the cops the video, but they couldn't get a license plate number. When my cousin and his wife returned the next week, I told them what happened and we watched the tape. He said that he had no idea who the women were, but his wife looked angry. I packed up, thanked them for my vacation, and left. I still don't know all the details of the aftermath. I do know that several of our family members with the same last name as my cousin got calls in the days afterward from a woman looking for her cousin's first name. But I had shared the story pretty widely in the family and no one would commit to knowing who she was. The caller said that her name was Amber and said that she was just trying to return something to him. She cried during one of the calls, but I don't know if that was a genuine feeling or for show. One thing is clear, though. My cousin's wife divorced him that summer. Story 2. A couple who would drive by at random hours of the day for a full week would walk up to the house and look at my dogs, pit bulls, look into each window in the front and even check the back gate and fence. The camera was older and had no notifications, so the only way we knew was the moment they decided to open up the door while I was homesick, and were subsequently rushed by my dogs. I heard the commotion and grabbed my only weapon I had, a bat, to find the front door open in what looked like a horror scene in my living room. It was a mess. There were stains everywhere, all over the floor, the front door, the little entranceway, and the window. It turns out I have 2 very good boys, and the idiots went to the hospital to eventually be caught by police. They were going to take my dogs to dogfights, involved in a bunch of other seedy things. Those intruders weren't so bright. I don't think they thought their plans through. Story 3. I installed some security cameras after some altercations with a horrible neighbor. The most I'd see was a squirrel or maybe a raccoon or two. I saw a fox once. That was cool. One night I saw a guy walking up and down the street, passing my house over and over again. He seemed to limp more and more with each pass before he collapsed. Later we found out that the guy was on a massive trip and he expired there, on the sidewalk, in front of my house. There was a stain on that patch for weeks. I gave my cops the footage and they managed to put together a schedule of what happened. It turns out he harmed his girlfriend during his trips and my footage placed him near the crime scene with evidence in his hands. I was freaked out and I didn't leave the house much. I'm really superstitious about morbid things. Story 4. I wasn't asleep, but when I lived with my ex, we had a few security cameras and they sent you alerts when there was motion detected. I was at work and got an alert that there was motion in the living room and I figured it was my ex coming home early, but I checked it anyway. Instead, I saw my dog standing in the middle of the living room, staring at the wall. He stood there for a minute and then got on the sofa to sleep. 2 things were terrifyingly off about that. Number 1, my dog was a puppy at the time and was crated when home alone. The crate is made of solid wood and metal grates and has a thick and heavy eye and hook latches, so there's no conceivable way he could have opened the door. Number 2, he was kept in the office, which is located off the hall, and we kept the door separating the living room from the hall closed during the day to keep the room cooler for him. I looked back at the recording because I was very confused, and unfortunately, because the hall door was closed, I couldn't see how his grate got opened. But the hall door opened on its own, and he walked out into the living room about 30 seconds later. The hall door was like a regular bedroom door. It closed with a knob and wouldn't have opened even if you pushed on it. There were no sounds aside from the normal house noises. No cars or people had been in view of the outside camera since we'd left, and no other motion detections had gone off. Well, it could have been a very polite ghost who thought the puppy needed some time out of the crate. Story 5. So I'm sitting in my living room at night. I just recently moved into my new apartment. I'm in a basement flat with my own entrance in a little townhouse on the edge of town. Quiet area, with lots of trees, cheap rent, and no public transport or cell reception. I'm living alone for the first time. I just set up the security cameras and hooked them up to a new monitor. I hadn't figured out where to put the monitor. I'd never had a security system before. It was on my work desk, which was at the living room window. I noticed this slight yellow glow out of the window and in the corner of my eyes, slowly getting brighter. As it does, I notice in the camera that there's a huge shadow cast across my door that looks kind of animal but has weird proportions. I quietly scared myself. It sits there for a while, like a good 10 minutes, moving just enough to make me wonder if I'm imagining it moving. There's a kind of whining or buzzing noise, but it's faint and I might be imagining it. Then all of a sudden there's a loud pop from inside my building. The glow goes instantly away, there's a sound like an angry cat and then really rapid footsteps. I'm in like full cardiac arrest at this point, crying for my mom. Flash forward a week or so. I haven't been eaten by a cat shadow monster, though I do have a sudden new interest in exorcisms. I meet the upstairs neighbors when they're having trouble getting a large package up the stairs. They offered me tea as a thank you. I notice their cat sitting in the window. Its movement reminds me of something. And after a while, I realize it's the shadow monster. I ask a few questions to round out the details. It turns out the neighbors had one of those lights on a sensors that turned on when they detected movement. Cat jumps up to the ledge, the light turns on, but it was an eco light, so it warmed up slowly. It then went out, loudly. I'm too embarrassed to recant the story, so I make my excuses, leaving the nice couple upstairs with the impression that their new downstairs neighbor is a weirdo who stares at cats, has a keen interest in light bulbs, and has a predilection for nervous laughter. They don't invite me up for tea anymore, but they do ask if I'm okay every time they see me. Story 6. My brother got a new security camera and he was having trouble sleeping. He lives in an apartment building with a couple of other people in the hallway. He kept waking up to a person trying to open his door in the middle of the night. He eventually found out it was a neighbor who got buzzed a lot and was trying to get into the wrong apartment. The neighbor eventually went away. A couple of weeks later, he came home and there were a bunch of cops outside of his apartment. It turns out that his other neighbor, who had also been pestered by this guy in the middle of the night, had ended the guy who kept knocking on my brother's door. My brother caught it all on his security camera. He turned it over to the police and the neighbor got arrested and went to jail. He didn't end up going to jail. My brother still sees him walking around the apartment complex. Story 7. After getting an indoor camera, I noticed there's always a motion event at almost exactly 4 a.m. Every single day. My dog gets up and paces the house slowly. He always makes one loop around the downstairs and then stares at the basement or back door, they're next to each other, for a few minutes, then goes back to bed. I have a camera on the outside of the back door and there's never anything there at the same time. So either my dog just has this weird habit or there's something that gets his attention in the basement. My money's on the dog just doing what he thinks is a safety check since dogs are naturally protective. Whether animals or humans, it seems everybody has an interesting secret they keep. But unfortunately, they can't keep it from cameras. If you want to watch more interesting videos like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Story 8. When I lived with an ex and her family, her dad's van was keyed very badly, so being an electrician, he decided to set up a camera overlooking the street where we parked our cars. The camera was accessible via an app that I had on my iPad, and it would pick up on movement, record it, and save it, or you could watch it live. The house was just around the corner from a pub, so we just assumed it was some buzzed person mucking about on the way home. One Saturday morning, I went out to the street to see that all our cars had been keyed. I frantically checked the app, and there was an update at 11:30 p.m., but it was just a dog walker. Myself and my girlfriend's dad checked all the updates from the last 24 hours, but nothing. We thought that maybe someone could have moved the camera because it was all in plain view outside of the house, so my girlfriend's dad moved it to a more subtle position. From then on, every Friday night for several weeks, we'd have the iPad set up in the living room, watching the camera live. Nothing happened and we soon lost all interest and forgot about it. A few months later, I was on my iPad in the house on a Friday night, deleting some apps when I came across the camera app. My girlfriend and I shared a joke and decided to watch it live. At around midnight, my girlfriend had gone to bed and I was watching the end of a film with my dog when something caught my eye on the iPad. I had forgotten I'd left it running. I watched the screen as I saw what looked like an old lady walk past the house in cars. What was she doing at this time? I thought. Something to do with the church? Soon she disappeared out of sight as she waddled down the street. But 5 minutes later, the movie had finished and I turned all lights off in the living room. The only light I had was an iPad screen. I picked it up and went to turn it off, but stopped when I saw something on the screen. It was the old lady again, standing outside the house. She just stood perfectly still, staring straight into the camera. She must have stood there for a good 2 minutes before reaching one hand into her pocket, pulling an object out, and walking over to my car. She then frantically started using the object in the bonnet. Me and my dog then bolted out of the back door and burst out into the street, ready to catch this old lady red-handed. The street was empty. No old ladies, just the parked cars outside the house. I jogged up and down the street but saw nobody. There was no way she could have gotten away in the seconds it took me to get out of the house. Confused, I went to bed and the next morning I told my girlfriend and her old man all about what had happened the previous night. He studied the recordings and the camera had picked it all up to her walking past originally, her walking away after she had vandalized the car, and me and my dog appearing a split second later on camera. Our girlfriend's dad took the recordings to a work colleague in the hope he could enhance the picture quality so we could see the lady in more detail. It worked. We got to see her in all her glory. Our girlfriend's mom recognized her. She lived 2 doors down from us and regularly visited the church. We used the recording and reported it to the police. My girlfriend and I split up soon after, so I don't know what happened. I certainly never saw a penny for any of the damage caused to my car. Story 9. I live in an apartment unit right next door to the office. They installed a new security camera for their door, which covers a part of mine as well, shortly after I moved in. The office manager knocked on my door a few days after the installation and asked me to come look at something. She pulled up footage of the night before that showed a guy pacing in front of my door for 6 hours. He even left for a couple of minutes and came back with something he tried to stick in my doorframe a few times. I was asleep the whole time and heard nothing. It turned out to be the recent ex of a friend of mine. I'd only met him once. I still have no idea how he knew where I lived unless he followed her to my place once, as we lived close to each other. The cops were called, reports were filed, and they eventually found him. He had been in a pretty bad substance bin since their breakup, from what I heard, and has no recollection of being there. To lighten up the mood a little, another story I have was when some time ago I kept finding this weird whitish sludge in the middle of the corridor when I woke up in the morning. My wife and I suspected that the dog was sneakily having fun while we were asleep, so we set up a motion sensor camera and left it running during the night. When I checked the recording at one point, I saw this white figure emerging from the darkness and skittering real fast across the corridor until it slammed into the wall. On closer inspection, I realized it was my wife, who was bending backward and crawling like a crab real fast until she hit something and fell. Anyway, it turns out she sleepwalks or sleep crabs, so now I have to give her pills for that. Unless those pills are filled with holy water and the word of the Lord, I don't see what they can do to stop her. Story 10. There have been a string of car break-ins in our neighborhood lately. We've had cameras up for a couple of years now, so we check the footage. Unfortunately, while we have the wannabe thieves on camera, there was nothing worth stealing in either mine or my husband's car. We have no idea who they are. The cops can't do much without an ID. One of them is wearing very distinctive shoes, though, so we have been on the lookout for an unusual pair of Nikes and who might be wearing them. It stinks when you can only watch someone break into your car. Another one was, we were not asleep, but we were eating breakfast. There's a school down the street from our house. It's literally 2 houses down. Anyway, in the mornings, there's lots of traffic and children with their parents going to school. They walk past our house nearly every day and we never thought anything of it. Anyway, one day, there was a kid who we caught in the security camera running and some guy was chasing after him. It turns out he was trying to forcibly take the kid and we had it on tape. The kid got to school and told his teacher and the police came and asked to see what we recorded via camera. It was crazy. Watch your kids. The guy was arrested and the kid is totally safe now. Now we see his dad taking him to school. I know it's a little off topic, but we also have a funny one we caught on camera. Our neighbor is a huge a-hole who can't handle his drink. He likes to listen to crappy mariachi music all night and into the early morning, which wouldn't have been a problem on the weekend, but he likes to do it on a Wednesday night. It's a pain when you have to go to work in the morning. Our neighbor called the cops on him and we got to watch him get pepper sprayed in the face on camera. It was hilarious. Story 11. I used to work for a company in California. Pretty small office just off the side of the road. There's a lot of gang activity around the area. They've got the Ring doorbell camera so they can safely tell if they can open the door at night. One night there's a group of guys hanging around looking at our property. We don't think much of it because they leave in about 10 minutes. The next day a guy shows up and just walks into our fabrication shop in broad daylight, looking around. This has never happened before. Our boss intervenes immediately. Boss, can I help you? Guy. Oh, crap. Hey there. Are you guys hiring? Boss. No. You have 5 seconds to get out of my property. The guy leaves in a mad dash. We called the cops and they found him walking down the street 5 minutes later. It turns out the gang was planning on robbing our facility while we were on holiday leave and they'd assigned him to scout out the interior. The dude was obviously a pro at reconnaissance. Not. Story 12. This incident is actually the reason we got security cameras. My stepmom owns a little cottage up in Michigan, where she grew up. We spend most of the time I'm with him in the summer at the cottage. It's in a very safe and small neighborhood. Everyone knows everyone. Of course, we always lock the doors and close the blinds and whatnot, but we always have one light on somewhere in the house so that it looks like someone's up. We all went to sleep pretty late one night. I stayed up a little bit longer, binging Sean Dawson's conspiracy theory videos. By a bit longer, I mean to 1 or 2 in the morning. But then I was all but out, so I turned off my phone and went to sleep. The next morning, when I was brushing my hair, my stepmom said in a nervous tone of voice, "Jack," not my dad's real name, "why is there a handprint in the kitchen window?" My dad, of course, said he didn't know. It didn't match any of our hand sizes, so it was none of us, and it was on the outside. The place where the handprint was is pretty close to the ground, so we assumed the person who did it was crawling or crouching to not be seen. Our doors and windows were locked and the light was on, so we think that's why nobody broke in. A little while later, we got security cameras. Story 13. We have quite a big yard with only a gate in the front and we live in the middle of a city. I was asleep during this, but my parents saw it happen and I saw the aftermath in the camera images. There was a guy who climbed over our gate and started screaming, "Bella! Bella!" My parents raced outside and asked the guy what he was doing while escorting him out of our yard. He said his dog ran into our garden. They looked for the dog with the man for about half an hour but couldn't find it. At this point, my parents sent the man home and went to look at the camera footage. We were looking at the footage and realized that there was no dog at all. Yeah, the man was pretty wasted. Another one was the doorbell cam went off at 3 a.m. I flipped to the live view and a deer was standing in my yard, staring directly at the camera, close enough that the camera thought it was a person at the door. Deer stood there for a solid minute, just not moving. The eyes had that creepy night vision look, so it was extra weird. And then the deer took a dump while maintaining eye contact with the camera, and that kind of ruined the mood. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. What are some very creepy facts? Story 4 will make you look at the back of your car before getting in. See you on that video.